people here already. We'll probably leave it maybe 1-2 minutes, but people who are here already, you'll see in the bottom right, there's a little chat box. Maybe just to check that that's working for you, just pop in where you're joining us from today, and then we'll get started in a minute. Nice. Okay. Well, we might get going. My name is Luella. I'm the Programs and Exhibitions Manager here at Flying Arts. I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar, Public Art Unpacked with Urban Art Projects. We are joined by John Nicholson, UAP Senior Associate and Lead Designer, and Tess Bakharia, UAP Assistant Curator. To begin, I'd like to make an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge all the lands from which we meet today. I'd like to acknowledge the Yagara and the Turrbal people, the traditional owners of the lands from which our Flying Arts offices operate. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, customs, laws, and creation spirits, and to acknowledge that these were always places of art making and learning. Some housekeeping. This platform that we use, this is called Click Meeting. As I just mentioned, in the bottom right, there's a little chat box. So at the end, if we have any time for questions, just pop your question in there and I'll ask that to Tess and Nicholas. We are also recording this session. So after the session today, if you happen to drop out throughout, don't stress. The recording will be sent to you afterwards. Okay, so in conversation today, we have John and Tess. They will delve deeper into the processes behind some of UAP's most iconic public artworks. Tess Bakharia is an assistant curator at UAP. In her role, Tess contributes to the delivery of public art strategies that articulate a curatorial approach to commissioning artworks for developments, public spaces, or cities. As part of the UAP consultancy team, Tess collaborates with a range of clients and artists across Australia and the Middle East. John Nicholson is a Senior Associate Lead Designer at UAP. In his role as Lead Designer, John supports artists to realize their creative visions in the public realm. During his time at UAP, John has worked on a number of significant local and international public artworks with a range of emerging and established artists. So I'll throw over to you guys to take us through some of your great projects.
Thanks, Luella. I'll just check before we start if this sounds okay. I think a couple of people in the chat are having trouble. But I'll just check that everyone can hear us. Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks. We will get into it. As Luella, are you okay for us to go? Okay, great. So as Luella mentioned, my name is Tess. I'm joined by John today. I'll also start with an acknowledgement of country. So John and I are also coming to you from Meanjin, Meganjin in Brisbane, and we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Turrbal and Yagara people, pay our respects to elders, past and present. We acknowledge as well that sovereignty has never been ceded. So today, I've got a little intro slide here as well, but you may recognize me from last year's webinar with Flying Arts, which was called Public Art Made Public. And there we really spoke to UAP as a whole and gave a high-level overview of our capabilities. And we chatted through some case studies of our public art projects. If you are interested in learning more about UAP, it's available on YouTube, so please give it a watch. It's a great starting point for our conversation, and today we're really going to delve deeper into the UAP process, and the key part of our process really is working with artists. There wouldn't be public artworks without the artists themselves, so we really are the kind of conduit for making that happen. I wanted to talk about our process a little bit as well, which I'll jump into in a second. And as Luella mentioned, John is a very talented, experienced designer with UAP. He's been with the company for over a decade now, which is incredible. And he's really helped to shape some of UAP's most iconic public artworks. So we'll be looking in detail today about how those came about through the design process. But to give you a bit more context on that, just a quick overview of how the UAP process works and how we develop public artworks. So essentially, the process begins when a commissioner identifies the need for a public artwork. Sometimes this would be through a council requirement or a mandated public art scheme. We have one here in Brisbane, so often that's how public artworks are made here. But other ways can involve a kind of commissioner-led approach when they just use their own initiative to develop a public artwork because it's something that they're really excited about. And you'll see in our projects today, actually, we have a mix of council mandated and also commissioner-led by some of the great institutions across Australia as well. So once we start a project, once a public art project is initiated, often it begins by engaging a public art curator, which is where UAP comes in. And during the curatorial stage, really, we'll start by developing a strategy for the artwork. We'll figure out relevant themes, site narratives, curatorial aspirations for the artwork, and also look at its location and its typology and how it should best exist in the space. And what comes through that process is artist procurement, which is, again, that key step. And so you can see on screen here, this is an example project from the Aquilizans in Sydney for Sirius. And they were engaged as the artist for the project, and they moved through with UAP through concept design, technical design, and then ultimately fabrication and installation. So with that overview, I will move on to John and his role. So really, as a designer, John, could you talk a little bit about what your role is at UAP?
Of course. Thanks for that great introduction, Tess. It's very flattering as well to hear those things spelled out. So basically, my role is to facilitate the design process. So you can think of me as someone who bridges ideation with the fabricated reality of what the artwork might end up being.
Totally. Yeah. And in terms of that, I guess, role that you have, can you give us a bit of an overview of how the process occurs and how you work, or the different ways that you work with artists throughout that process?
Yeah, of course. So we normally start with concept design, and that's really where ideation begins. So I appreciate that every artist works very differently. Normally when artists respond to brief, they'll give me an insight into their working process through whichever medium they choose to ideate with. So that could be sketches. It might even just be statements, quotes, or a palette of images. Sometimes artists make models or do other kind of processes. So once I've received that information, I sit with it, and then we start to workshop as to how to how these concepts could be realized in the public realm.
Awesome. Yeah. And then following from that, there's another design stage, which is technical design.
Correct.
Which is a bit of a different way of working, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail through some of the projects that John's worked on. But can you give a brief overview of what that involves?
Yeah, so at the end of concept design, we have this, hopefully we end up with a really fabulous concept that is realized through 3D models and beautiful visuals. So we'll have some really great CGI renderings that really, help bring the artist and the client on the journey and to really give them a taste of what the artwork might be. Now, that's not where the process ends, unfortunately. We have to see it through to reality. So the technical design process is another kind of bridging step between when we fabricate and what's been ideated. So the technical design process really goes into a lot of detail with material specification engineering, how all of the moving bits come together to make this a functional piece. So a lot of problem solving basically happens in that phase. Yeah.
And just on that, and particularly in the technical design stage, but also throughout concept design, there's a lot of considerations that come with working in the public realm or at a large scale that are very different from gallery practice. So what are some of those key considerations that you're working with?
Yeah, so I think we all can appreciate that galleries are very different environments to the one that is outside in the public realm. In galleries, you typically have a nice clean white backdrop, usually, and the way that people interact with the work is very curated and very, a lot more constrained. Whereas in the public realm, you have to work with things like climate, and you've got to make sure that when people do interact with the work, which you can't really control to a great extent how people will interact with something, you've got to make sure that it's safe for them to do so and that there isn't any kind of risk associated with that. And obviously it has to have a fair bit of longevity. We want to make sure that our artworks last a really, really long time. I would like for them to outlast the buildings that they are sitting in amongst. So that process of material translation is really, really important because not every single artist works in industrial materials. So I think that's part of the joy for me, at least, is trying to find connections between those really industry standard materials with the artist's usual material that they work with in their practice.
Totally. And yeah, that's definitely, I guess, one of UAP's strengths.
Yeah.
And that's probably the key learning experience for artists along the journey of working with us and working in the public realm. But to really unpack this design process further and kind of going into the actual fabrication of artworks as well, let's look at some examples of some of the artworks that you've worked on. John's worked with both emerging and established artists, and you'll see here that oftentimes John has met artists at an early point in their career and then really worked with them to see them move into that more established zone, which is so exciting. So the first artwork we wanted to talk about today is Claire Healy and Sean Cadero's Place of the Eels. You might have seen this work online. Essentially, it's a life-sized bus, and it sits vertically in a very precarious-looking position in the middle of Parramatta Square in New South Wales. And it's so impressive if you see it in person, so definitely have a look if you're in the area. But essentially, Claire and Sean are really exciting artists, and they're particularly known for their ability to tap into a history of a site, which is a really important element of public artworks because they are site-specific, and they really reference these histories in very unique and creative ways. So in this work, the artists were drawing on the idea of Parramatta and its traditional place name, being derived from Barramatagal, the Gadigal word. And so that name actually means the place where eels sit down. And the artist really tapped into this concept and took it in a different direction in terms of referencing the Parramatta Eels football team, which is another iconic element of Parramatta. And there's actually a great story, which John can talk a little bit more about, of how the football team actually came to have a bus.
Yeah. It's a fascinating story. So I believe, and please don't quote me, but basically, I think in the late 80s or potentially early 90s, there was some rioting and the stadium got burned down. So our lovely football team didn't have anywhere to meet or practice, so the coach took some initiative and bought this old bus.
And then this became the place where the eels literally
sat
down, which is pretty. It's cool how they've kind of taken that into that reference. And so, thinking about that, what was it like to work with Claire and Sean to develop the artwork concept, and how did the artist land on this idea of placing a life-size bust in the public realm. Yeah, how did they come to that as the concept?
Yeah, I mean, it's so great working with Claire and Sean just because of the depth of layering that they have in their practice, obviously. Even from the very, very first conversations we had, during the inception of this idea, the bus was there. I think it was such a strong emblem that Claire and Sean really gravitated towards. So basically, there was an exchange of reference images, and there was an exchange of ideas, some quotes from newspaper articles, and then it sort of started to settle that the bus would be the central item that we would be focusing on. So the next thing that quickly came into the concept was that the artists really wanted to have this bus recreated, not only at an enormous scale, but they wanted it to be in mirror, a mirrored object, because as we know, mirrors literally reflect place around us. So that's where that conceptual tie comes in. And mirrored surfaces are notoriously challenging to work with, both from a fabrication point of view, but also in terms of how it holds up in the public realm. So material specification was something that we thought about very early on, and as you can see there, we're looking at a reflective sample in that image, which is cast aluminium that's been polished to a really, really high finish.
And you've got a miniature of the bus.
That's
there
right.
as well.
Yeah, good pickup. So because the actual type of bus that they used is so important, we basically did a bit of a dig around to see where we could find a reference for this object, because obviously the found object is also really important, and it pops up quite continuously in Claire and Sean's practice. So I did a bit of hunting online and found a model maker that actually had this particular bus in stock. So we bought it and we did a 3D scan of it. So we basically translated that object into a 3D model that we could then manipulate and kind of play around with and develop.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we have some more images here, and I guess, John, could you talk maybe a bit more about that process then? So you've 3D scanned a bust, but how do you go from a digital scan or model into a physical?
Yeah, how do we get it into the real world? So we have a number of fabrication processes at UAP, but one that we most commonly work with, and we find it kind of yields the best kind of results in terms of fidelity, is casting. And that involves having a mold, a positive mold, that we then take imprints on in sand, and then the liquid metal gets poured into those molds, and then we end up with a cast object. So what we're looking at here is Ian, one of our pattern makers. He's unfortunately moved on from UAP into retirement. So he's basically cleaning up the patterns there. So those are panels of the bust that were cut out of styrofoam with a robotic milling tool. So it's like we've got I think it's a 5-axis robot. So it's like, I don't know if you can see my fingers. Do you have any images of it?
Yeah, we have
maybe
some later on.
Yeah. So it basically cuts those forms out of foam, and that's all programmed by the technical team. Based on the 3D model that was developed.
Amazing. And so we have some more images here. Just flick through. There's a little bit of a lag. Sorry, but looking at the wheel.
Yep, that's a wheel.
So again, looking at the pattern making process, and then you can see in this next image of how the aluminium ultimately comes out of the molds.
Yeah, so those are fresh castings. They literally were just broken out. So our sand molds are enormous. They weigh a couple of ton. Sometimes, depends on the size of the casting, but the aluminium gets broken out and they come out looking like this. It's a dull gray color. There's a lot of flash. So flash is the bit of metal that seeps through between the part lines. So we've got the male and female mold kind of joining. So that all needs to be ground off, and then you have to deal with that matte gray surface that has to be mirror shine. So that in itself is a whole process.
We have an image here of the bus kind of being put together, but it's still in that dull, dull shape. You can see some of our team inside the bus in this image, which is very fun. But then moving to the mirror shining, so it comes out with that really reflective finish.
So to get aluminium to be that shiny as no small feat, it takes about 9 steps of finishing. So that's, if you imagine 9 steps of finishing, a couple of hours each per panel. We had, I don't know how many panels of individual castings that we had to work through. It's quite a labor-intensive effort. But yeah, there you can see we've got our really, really shiny reflective surface.
It's an amazing outcome. The fact that it's so true to life, I suppose, or true to the model, and that casting process being an amazing way to translate that so exactly. We also, I wanted to ask you about kind of going back to Claire and Sean and their practice and the way that they tap into site histories. It's often a layered exploration, and so there's multiple ways that they tap in and include that within the finalized artwork. So can you talk a little bit about how those little nuances of history made their way into the final artwork?
If you ever do see the bus in real life, please have a good look at it, because there are little Easter eggs and everything, little things etched into the surface of the bus that kind of communicate meaning. One of them, this is not so much of an Easter egg, it's really loud and proud on the bus, but it's the Flying Pie Man. So this is a historical figure from the Parramatta region. He was a traveling pie salesman, and he did these awesome acrobatic tricks. So a very colorful character, very emblematic of Parramatta. So we decided to include him larger than life on the side of the bus, almost as if it was signage applied to the bus, which, we all know that buses are prime real estate for those sorts of things. So and that was we cut him from aluminium on the flatbed CNC. So it's like almost like that kind of badge type of feel with enameled paint on the inside.
Awesome. And all of that came together into the final artwork, which we also have a photo of, which is coming up on screen. But it's amazing to see how it all ended up coming together, and the multiple and extensive steps involved in that process. We'll move now to another public artwork. And John, an artist that you've worked with many, many times and continue to work with during your time at UAP is the acclaimed Judy Watson, who draws upon her matrilineal connections to one country in northwest Queensland, and this really informs her distinctive use of form and texture and colour, which is very present across all her artworks. But she's also developed a number of significant public artworks, which are multi-dimensional and really thought-provoking when found in the public realm. The first major public artwork that you worked on with Judy was Tobro, which is a cast bronze fishing net outside of the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art, in Brisbane, and it was commissioned for the gallery's 10-year anniversary, and of course fabricated by UAP. And Judy is based as well in Brisbane, so there's lots of opportunities for you to collaborate with her here in person and really explore hands-on ideation in our workshop and foundry. Can you tell us a little bit about this process of translating artist ideas into more tangible outcomes, and how it feels to see that come to life through the workshop?
Well, look, it's certainly, when we hit the fabrication stage, things get really, really interesting. It's the highlight of the project, you could say. And it's different for every single artist, because every project is different. Every artist works differently. Every artist practice is different. So for this instance, working with Judy, it was such a wonderful experience, because we really had a lot of, hands-on collaboration, because Judy likes to work in a more analog kind of way. So it wasn't really well, at least during this time period, things weren't as digital. And obviously Judy living close by was really great, because that meant that she came in a lot during the actual fabrication process to approve and influence things. The fantastic part about this project and what made it so unique was that Judy actually engaged a Quandamuka artist and master weaver, Lisi Carmichael, to actually make the net object itself. And she did that here at UAP. And it was also something that almost every department had a hand in touching throughout the entire process. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And you can see here John working with Judy and Lisi,
Mhm.
and what they're looking at there is actually I guess, museum reference
Yes.
for the form. So the toe row. Can you talk a little bit about that process of determining the form?
Yeah, so Judy's practice is really grounded in historical artifact, and she's almost like a cultural archaeologist in the way that she layers meaning and basically rediscovers these objects from Australia's past. So Judy's process normally starts with a lot of research, and this object that we're looking at here is it's a teaching net. It's an artifact kept by the Queensland Museum. They were very, very generous and let us take it not only to reference, but to actually use as the artwork maquette. So what you see here is it's been kind of placed, and kind of I guess the net has been deformed and kind of curated by Judy herself to basically inform the final artwork. So we took a ton of photos of that, and that became the basis of Toro.
Yeah. And of course, something that's so special about Judy's practice is, and by engaging Lisi to hand weave the net, she's continuing the life of these traditional practices, so that they don't just exist in museums, but are very much living and part of First Nations enduring cultural strength and connection. So it's very exciting. And so here you can see the pattern developed from the net. But of course, there is no net on this yet.
Yeah.
Because part of this is forming the positive, negative.
Yeah. So what we were looking at there is a negative solid. So basically, that is the armature that the net got draped onto. So obviously the net is a very floppy, elastic material. To be able to cast it and make it hold a form, it needed some sort of rigid support. So that's what Ian Ian is working on sculpting that by hand, which was that's amazing. That we still have that capability here. Yep. So if you go up to that photo, so you can see the net is now draped over a portion of the styrofoam there. And Judy is obviously giving some feedback to Ian.
And then that informs the casting.
Yes.
Which we'll see in this next image of translating that entire net form into bronze. Yeah.
So this was honestly one of the most challenging casting jobs I think we've ever had on the books. Just because nets they are just really, really challenging to cast because of all the open area that you need to deal with. So there's as I think from one of the previous images, we know that the aluminium came out a little bit rough with all of that flashing, sharp edges and things. Imagine that, but multiplied by a factor of 1,000. So you have, I think you can see someone's going in there with a Dremel to basically, to cut off all of those bits, but then also probably bringing back some texture in that gets lost in that process.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you can see how it translates to the final artwork.
Yep.
And I'm sure many of you have probably seen it in person as well, outside of Goma. It's so fantastic and beautiful. But moving on to another one of Judy's works, probably one of her most significant is Bara down in Sydney. which is a 6-meter tall monument to the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people. It was curated by Arrente and Kalkadoon curator and cultural advisor Hetty Perkins, and fabricated by UAP. And really, this artwork takes the form of a large bara or shell hook used by the Gadigal people for fishing. Can you talk a little bit more about this project?
Of course. So this project came to us in the same way that many other projects do, through an expression of interest that was put out by the gallery, Queensland Gallery of Modern Art.
City of Sydney.
Sorry. I'm stuck on the other. Sorry. Sorry, City of Sydney.
Yeah.
Basically, Judy came to me with a whole bunch of ideas. Like you mentioned, we've been working together for a really long time, so we do have a bit of a common visual language that we like to work with. And the shell hook came into the mix very, very quickly. Judy really kind of latched onto it as the most appropriate symbol for the Gadigal people. We had to go through this really, protracted process with the City of Sydney, and obviously with all of the community stakeholders to make sure that the artwork was commensurate with the expectations of the project. So there's a lot of pressure involved with that. One of the things that was really that was challenging was siting the work. You want to make sure that you select the most appropriate location for it, and make sure that it really is in line with the importance of what the monument is meant to represent. So that was a bit of the design process there.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. And the final form was actually made entirely out of marble by expert stonemasons in China.
Yeah.
But that's quite a different process from what UAP typically does with casting. So could you talk a bit more about, the intricacies and complexities behind this particular method?
Of course. I think, as everyone can tell, casting is one of our preferred fabrication methods because of its kind of traditional role within sculpture making, and it is something that UAP is very well versed in. So initially, the bara was going to be bronze, but through the iterative process during the design stage and consulting with City of Sydney, and obviously with Hetty's amazing feedback from a cultural perspective, it soon became clear that bronze wasn't the right material selection, just because these shell hooks are incredibly beautiful, gleaming, pearlescent objects, and bronze wasn't going to be able to get us there. So we spoke about a couple of materials, but Carrara marble kept being thrown back at us. So we know the role that Carrara marble has in art history and monument making in particular. It's kind of the gold standard material really for a lot of sculptors. So that is kind of where we landed on in terms of the materiality. And obviously this artwork is situated in proximity to the Opera House, also another iconic Australian landmark, and there's definitely like a dialogue in terms of color between those two objects.
Really?
So unfortunately, and in Australia, stone masonry is not that prevalent. It's really, really difficult to find skilled masons in Australia that can work at this kind of immensity of scale. So we did have to look internationally to find the appropriate craftspeople to do the work. So at UAP, our philosophy is we will do what is best for the project. And in this instance, that was the case.
Yeah. And also with the form, the kind of complexity
there.
I'll jump back to this image. You can see how the kind of almost cantilever of the form.
So it's a really, really challenging form from a geometric sense. It does have that that sharp point that leans over. Stone doesn't really like to bend. It is a very inflexible material, so we obviously wanted to make sure that it was first and foremost safe to be around, that there wasn't any danger in having that in the public realm. So we did go through quite a fair bit of engineering, and we did also, work very closely with stonemasons and stone experts to make sure that that how we actually designed the joining mechanisms and the way that the form actually behaves in 3D was in line with the capacity of marble itself.
Yeah, amazing. It's such a beautiful artwork again. You and Judy did an incredible job, as with everybody who worked on the project.
Yeah.
We'll move now to another project, which I'm sure is very well known in the audience, but another artist that you've worked with countless times over your time at UAP is Lindy Lee, and she's become incredibly renowned across Australia and internationally for her public artworks. And last year, Lindy completed the most significant commission so far in her career with the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra, the Ouroboros. And this was curated by NGA for the 40th anniversary of the gallery and fabricated by UAP. And it really is this incredible beacon that sits within the landscape now. But going back a bit, can you talk a little bit about the first time that you worked with Lindy on a public artwork?
Yeah, this is probably almost a decade ago now. Lindy, while being an incredibly established artist in the art sphere in general, hadn't really done many public art commissions at that point. So there was still a lot of exploration still happening and transitioning her practice into something that is, a little bit more permanent, if that makes sense. This is for St. George's Hospital. It's an interior work, and it was a really kind of great leaping point for Lindy's practice. Unfortunately, the big commissions don't come around the first time. You have to work really hard to get to the point where Lindy was to be awarded with the biggest commission in Australian history. So yeah,
it's pretty incredible. And so going back to the Ouroboros as the opposite end of this timeline in Lindy's work in public art, can you explain the process of the Ouroboros and what it was like to work on?
Yeah, so this was again a competition run by an institution. Lindy was the selected artist. The Ouroboros form was, it kind of crystallized pretty early on in the process, and then the real work had to start. It's an incredibly challenging three-dimensional form. Again, it had to be mirror polished. We know that in itself is a challenge, and it's perforated as well in reference to Lindy's practice of paper burning. So I was brought onto the project as not during the concept phase, but actually as part of the technical design team to basically facilitate the technical development of the work. So I facilitated a lot of conversations that were had with engineers and with the fabrication team to make sure that we could realize this incredibly significant work.
Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned there about the perforations, which are so characteristic to Lindy's style, but also come with a whole range of added complexity. Can you talk a bit about these perforations and how just generally this impacted or shaped the process of developing the artwork?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, those perforations are the key aspect of Lindy's practice, right? So that was almost like the most important thing to get right, apart from the geometry of the form itself. So to be able to translate those, I think it was more than 60,000 perforation marks onto the final form was, to be able to do that at scale would have been near impossible. So we actually fabricated a 1:2, so 50% scale maquette of the Ouroboros, which you can see there. So that's your, I think that's about 2 meters tall then. Yeah. So once we milled that maquette, Lindy and her team basically worked away at placing each and every single one of the perforation marks, which was little black stickers. And Lindy is very particular about the rhythm that this pattern has to take. So that gave her complete and utter control as to what that could do. We did have to impose some engineering parameters, unfortunately, but Lindy she's amazing, and she was really capable of working around those parameters, which is basically to do with the strength of the skin. So obviously, the more void you add to something, the less material you have to work with. So yeah, some tricky things to work with. And then what we did was we 3D scanned the maquette once it was done, and then we transposed the marks into digital space. And what you're looking at is this image. This image here is our design team actually marking the cast form of, I think that's part of the tail. So what they're seeing through those goggles that they're wearing, those are augmented reality goggles or headsets. They're actually seeing the circles overlaid onto the form in real time. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Now you're probably wondering, how did we actually perforate the metal? Every single hole was plasma cut by a single fabricator. One of Lindy's main criteria was that the holes had to be as circular as possible. That is no small feat. It's hard enough as it is to draw a circle by freehand on a piece of paper. So imagine doing that a couple of thousand, tens of thousands of times on a curved metal surface that's also reflective. So yeah, so we actually had a bit of an internal competition to see who could cut the most circular voids, and Jack, one of our fabricators, shout out to Jack, he cut every single one of them with the plasma cutter. Yeah, more than 60,000.
Amazing. It's so incredible.
Yeah.
And part of that, you mentioned like the engineering and that balance between voids in the surface and actually the surface itself. And another amazing thing about the Ouroboros is that it's ultimately self-supporting. So it's kind of like an eggshell in its construction.
I mean, that's part of the engineering marvel of it, is that it doesn't have an internal framework, and obviously because it's so diaphanous with all of the holes, you can't really have a framework, and they would completely disrupt Lindy's intent for the work. So a way for us to circumvent that need for a framework is to counterintuitively make a frame. So this frame here is actually more of a jig, or an armature. It was used to guide the welding of all of the individual stainless steel panels. So I think we had more than 200 panels that created the shape, and they all had to be welded seamlessly together. And this is just a guiding form for it, and to obviously give it strength to support itself until the point where it was actually fully welded together. Yeah, and then you can see the effect is already starting to come together. That was pretty amazing seeing that for the first time.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And what was the experience like of working on such a ambitious and large scale project, and particularly working with Lindy at this ultimate point in her career?
It was stressful. It was very stressful, just because it is the biggest commission in Australian history. So you do kind of wear a lot of responsibility while working on the project. And obviously we've not just Lindy and me, but Lindy and UAP have a very long working history together. So there is also a sense of responsibility towards that relationship. But Lindy is amazing to work with. One of my favorite artists to work with. She has such a kind and gracious nature. So even when things did get really heated, Lindy was a very calming presence for everyone, and she treated every single person with the utmost respect, while working on the project. So that was a really lovely experience, and it's such a pleasure to think back on some of those moments that we had. Yeah.
Amazing. And you can see we've got some images here of the Ouroboros now installed, and it's down in Canberra. So if you haven't already seen it and you are in Canberra, definitely go see it, because it's a whole experience. And I guess that was what Lindy as well was aiming towards with this commission. It's that really the nature of her work and the concepts behind it, to be able to walk into the work and experience it in that way is particularly exciting, and something that she's achieved for the first time in this commission, which is amazing. But just in the interest of time, we will now jump to our last little project, which is actually the most recent of one of our iconic public artworks, which is The Big Hose by artists Tony, Albert and Nell. This was recently unveiled at Quagoma. It was curated by their team there, and it is the Queensland Cultural Centre's first interactive playscape designed by an artist, which is really exciting. And essentially the premise of this artwork is coming from the idea that Quagoma represents a typical Queenslander, and what is always found on that front lawn is a hose. So playing with that and scaling up to a larger than life size in alignment with Queensland's and Australia's kind of fascination with large objects. But it also has a beautiful connection to the First Nations cultures of the area. The traditional naming of the place is Kurilpa, which is the place of the water rat. And so connecting that more recent Australian identity to that foundational First Nations context and culture, which is really awesome to see. And this project, many people worked on this project, as with all of UAP's projects, but in particular, UAP Associate and Technical Design Manager Alex Mays led the design on this project, but you supported him at various points throughout that project. And so what was really interesting, particularly about this concept, is that Tony and Nell used a actual garden hose as their maquette. So can you talk a bit about the process of translating something like a garden hose into an interactive playscape?
Stressful. It's a fantastic concept, but as you can imagine, the way that the hose is, the geometry of the hose works, it's a really complicated form. It's not easy to get materials to kind of behave in that way. We did work through a number of of structural concepts to get it to the point where it is today, but we ended up with guess what? Casting it. We cast it because it was it's actually the best way for us to customize the way that each of those bends behave. And aluminium is also quite a suitable material for something that's out in the public realm again. Yeah.
And it's amazing, you talked before with Bara about the way that stone doesn't bend, but here, of course, with the process of casting, you really have control of the form of the work, and so you're able to create such a realistic shape, which is really interesting.
Back with us in just a second. There we go. Hi. I think there we go. We got your sound now.
Okay, we need
Great.
video. Okay, we got video too.
Yeah, video's back. You're all good.
Where were we when we dropped out?
I think your mic might have changed though, because you're a bit quieter now. Oh, and we've lost them again. And we're back.
Oh, can you hear us?
Yeah. Great.
This one?
All good?
We can't hear you, but
You can't see me?
Can you hear us? Just
Yeah, we can hear you guys. You're all good.
No?
You're coming through all good. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll
okay.
just keep going, but we can't hear. But that's okay.
Okay.
Technology.
But yeah, we were talking about the hose and the casting process. So we have some great images here.
Yeah.
This is the mold making, as we talked about before, and you can start to see how this came to create many, many segments.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are your arc segments that basically when they welded together, you end up with the final shape, which you can see there. So I'd say probably 118 plus segments.
Yeah, it's incredible. And part of that process created some complexity around the finish because unlike some of the other artworks we've talked about today where they have a more inherent finish with the metal, this artwork was fully painted by hand by our wonderful painter here, Matt. Can you talk a bit about the complexity of that process?
Yeah, so not only was it painted, but it had this really complex pattern that had to go on it, obviously in reference to those green hoses that you can find at Bunnings, but also they are little boomerangs as well. So there's a bit of a dual symbology there. Each of those boomerangs had to be placed across the entire length of the hose, so the full 118 lineal meterage. So there you can see basically a whole host of people putting on vinyl resists on top of the green painted surface, and then Matt goes over and paints the light green over that. And that was an incredibly laborious process. It took a couple of weeks, if not months, to complete just the painting itself.
Yeah. And across the process, obviously there was many hands involved in our fabrication here in-house, but also there was a host of people who were engaged to inform this project. So not only us with fabricating the actual artwork itself, but Cox did the beautiful landscape design, which you'll see at the site. Playforce was in charge of the playscape, engineering and safety requirements, which is a whole additional aspect that not all public artworks have. And then Brisbane Softball as well, with the softball underneath, Partridge, the engineer. So many people involved to create such an expansive project, but the outcome is pretty spectacular.
And we can also see in some of those photos that the artist's hand actually played a fairly significant role as well. So Nell and Tony actually came in and did some actual painting on the work, which is a fairly rare thing in the world of public art. So it was lovely to have their actual, mark making embedded in the work. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's a really spectacular work. It's one of my favorites, and it's now open. There's been many children enjoying it as well since it opened. So definitely go have a look in person and engage with just the layers of story and the complexity of the design. There's so much to discover, which is so exciting. But that brings us to the end of our project. So I'd love to throw to the room in case anyone has any last questions. I don't think we have sound, so if you can pop them in the chat, that would be amazing. But yeah, thank you so much for having us, and hopefully this has been really insightful, and we look forward to chatting again soon.
Yeah, if everyone can just pop them down below. Tess can read them out.
That's a great question.
Which one?
So the question is from Bridie, how do you transport artworks from the workshop to site? And I mean, John can chat about this more, but it's so different for every artwork, right?
Yep. Look, for I guess Australian projects, we normally use big trucks. They go on the back of big trucks, so semi-trailers.
And that's a great point about the Ouroboros. And if you are interested in this process, there's actually a full ABC episode of it's like a truck show.
Well,
There's many episodes on Lindy and the process of the Ouroboros, but particularly one about the process of trucking that because that went in one piece from here to Canberra, which was a very coordinated approach. But in that instance, it was impossible to transport it in pieces because of how integral the preparations are to the whole.
It's not possible. Well, generally, it's not possible to weld on site. There's way too much risk associated with that. So we actually managed to find a truck company that was comfortable with transporting the object in its entirety. They usually transport Queenslanders, so there's our traditional housing that we have here. Look, not every single project is afforded that kind of budget to be able to do that. So with the hose, we actually transported it in kind of manageable sections. So there are some joins, not super visible, but it was in a couple of portions there that could fit onto the back of a truck.
How does that work then in portions? Is it that the pieces are then fixed individually in place? Or?
There's a quite a complex kind of curated installation sequence that needs to happen. So you need to make sure that one piece is in before the next one can come in, and then obviously you've got to work against tolerances. So the one piece might have moved a little bit, so you've got to kind of work with your installers to make sure that it all aligns as best as possible on site, and hopefully, if you're a smart designer, you would have factored in those tolerances. Yeah,
amazing. Are there any last questions before we go? Good question. So the question is, does UAP also handle the lighting of the artwork, or is that outsourced? And for this painted piece, the hose, does the sun degrade the paint at all? If so, is there primer or maintenance schedule? The paint is actually super interesting because part of that extensive paint process was many layers of paint, and there was actually a process of gloss coats initially to build up the sustenance of that paint finish, and then finishing with the final matte coat on top.
So
going back to lighting.
So basically, our bread and butter is the fabricated object. That's what we are specialists in. We sometimes do lighting projects, but that is generally with the help of consultants and subcontractors that are actually that are geared within that space. We don't ever tell an artist, no, we can't deliver your work. It's about finding the right people to work with so that we can deliver it. And just in terms of, I think there was a question about the fading of the.
The sun degrade.
Yep. So unfortunately, every pigment has a lifespan in the public realm. UV does play a role in that. There's not much you can do about it. UV coatings only last for so long as well.
But that comes down then to kind of ongoing maintenance.
There's an ongoing maintenance strategy, and there's also like kind of, we do also make the client and artists aware that things have a lifespan within the public realm. Everything has a design life. So paint is one of those things.
Yeah. And that's all factored in through the fabrication process.
Correct.
So it's a kind of focusing on the short term of how do we make the artwork, and then projecting long term about how do we keep this artwork looking amazing. I see there's lots of questions coming through. I would say, Bridie, your question about EOIs, I have more information in the first webinar about that if you'd like to check that out. But also, if you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Luella or myself, and we can answer those for you. I'll pop my email on screen down the bottom here. But just in regards to the Ouroboros, this will be our last question. John, how are the lights hidden, and also what about cleaning?
Okay, so the lights are inside of the Ouroboros. They were painted to color match the inside of the Ouroboros, and they're actually like they're spotlights, so they are mounted to the inner skin. They're pretty small objects, so like they, you could probably, you know, if you really looked, you could probably see the hotspot where they're coming from. And they're also lights mounted to the edge of the walkway, so that was there was an opportune integration that we had there. So yep, they're in there. They're not just floating balls of light. You can definitely spot them if you looked hard enough.
And what about cleaning?
And in terms of cleaning, that we've got an entire manual dedicated to how to clean the work and to maintain it. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time, I don't think, to elaborate on that full process. But yeah, it's pretty rigorous.
Yeah. And similar to the hose, it's all about that regular upkeep. So again, part of public art is not just thinking about the short term, whereas in a gallery, you might, galleries also have their own process of conserving and kind of storing works.
Yeah.
But public art is very much about thinking about building the work and then thinking about its lifetime after that.
And I guess, as with any owner of something, it's kind of it's really it's part of owning art is to make sure that it's taken care of, and every artwork is different, so every artwork will have its own requirements, but that's up to the owner of the work to make sure that the work stays in good nick.
Totally. Well, yeah, that's all from us. Again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Luella or myself. And thanks for your lovely comments. It was really lovely to chat today, and hopefully we'll be seeing you all out in the world and seeing the public artworks as well soon. So yeah, thanks, and see you later.
Thanks guys.
Everyone.
Thank you, Tess. Thanks, John. Bye, everyone.